Historical records show that in the year 2000 and something CE, a man named Jacob Drawfee once said,
"If I want to take like a collage of elements of my face and paste them all together and make that my VTuber, it's just a picture of me that's rigged up to face rig. The META VTuber has arrived."
For years, historians and scientists alike have speculated on what this odd statement could possibly mean. Was this a way to appease a power-hungry god or spirit? Maybe an omen of doom and destruction? Or perhaps a means of creating artificial light? But now, in October 2024, a breakthrough has been made. Archaeologists working in the fields of faraway Einterneet have found remnants of a humanoid form that they believe to be the man Jacob Drawfee himself, as well as a documented ritual that they believe can shed light on this so-called META VTuber. Hello, my name is ottonevermore, or just Otto, and I'm a VTuber on Twitch as well as an artist and a VTuber creator. I'm also a big fan of Drawfee, and last month I created my first Drawfee-inspired VTuber, which was Karina's OC Loose. This one is very different though. The vibes are not at all the same. In fact, it has such weird vibes that this was originally going to be a Halloween video, but as you can see, it's now the middle of November. For this one, I was very inspired by Jacob's strange suggestion of a collage of his face. It gave me such a strong mental image, I had to make it as soon as possible. As you can see, the process was also pretty unusual. Typically at this point, I would be drawing each feature and body part on their own different layers. I usually tend to, make my own art. But for this one, I have to go searching for a bunch of different screenshots of his face. I went ahead and looked in just a bunch of different secret sleepover VODs. I wanted to combine a bunch of different lighting situations to make the features feel very discordant and very mashed together. Also, usually when I make a VTuber, I draw it in one single pose, usually like facing forward, and then I warp each part in the VTuber program to make it look like it's turning and moving. But because I knew I couldn't really do that with a collage, I wanted to try out a different technique. So for Jacob, I found a screen cap for each direction that his head was going to turn, and I basically collaged together a keyframe for each cardinal direction. For some of the screenshots I found, Jacob had a very different hairstyle. I guess he had just gotten his hair cut, so you can see me clipping a different hairpiece to go on top. And of course I had to use part of this frame where he's imitating Felix, just an incredible facial expression. I also found out while making this that I guess Jacob doesn't look upward very often. So for the upward looking keyframes, I just did the best I could. Also, as I work, you can see me bringing up the hue, saturation, lightness sliders because sometimes the different screenshots were too similar. Usually in a normal VTuber, you would want them to blend in as much as possible, but not for the META VTuber, baby! Oh, and here's where I thought I might put something on Jacob's head. but I got too confused because I couldn't tell what it was, so I didn't end up including it. And then I forgot to record myself finding the right poses for his body. I chose to just go with facing left, facing center, and facing right, but typically a VTuber's body would also have upward and downward angles, like the head. Even though I wanted each frame to be a little bit different, I still wanted Jacob to look like he was wearing the same shirt in each one, so I ended up blocking out any images on them and just making it a generic black t-shirt. After I figured out the torso situation, I went through and I added a little drop shadow to each facial feature just to separate them a little more from the main face. At this point, it was already looking quite haunted, and I was pretty happy with how it was turning out. Then for some finishing touches, I cleaned up some of the hair, and I made sure that each keyframe had headphones, just for continuity's sake. And then I could export it and bring it into Live 2D. Of course, I start by making sure that all the pieces are properly named and ID'd. Then I go through and add meshes to each piece. I kept the shadows separate from the facial features they belong to so that the shadows can clip to the base head shape, but then the features can hang off the edges. That way it looks like each facial feature is a separate thing kind of floating in front of Jacob's head. It really adds to the weird vibes. First, I tried my rigging technique on the torso since it had fewer keyframes to worry about. For those who are curious, how I did it is I turned the left torso image to 100% opacity on the left keyframe and 0% opacity on the center and right keyframes. And then, in between, where it needed to swap, I added two keyframes very, very close to each other, one at 100% and one at 0%. Since those two keyframes are so close, the transition between the opacities is so quick it basically flips from one to the other immediately, so there's no weird half opacity fading. And if that doesn't make sense, that's okay. I promise I'm not going to quiz you on it later. I also added a slight Y movement to the torso. I made it very snappy with the same technique I used for the X keyframes, just instead of opacity, with position. And finally, a 2-frame breath movement and a Z movement. That's pretty much it for the torso. Then I started on the X movement of the head. I'll try not to speak too technically about it because I feel like it's starting to get not very fun, but basically I bundled each keyframe and its corresponding facial features up in their own little warp deformer folder, and I used that to toggle the opacity of the head and all its features all at once. It was basically the same technique as with the body, but on a much bigger scale because of course I have 9 keyframes instead of 3. This next part is just going to be a whole lot of flashing Jacob heads, because it took a little while for me to figure out which parts should be visible on which keyframes. I also added a little bit of warping movement to each transition just to soften the movement slightly. As you can see, I'm really trying my best here. It's just a lot of layers. But eventually I get it all figured out, and would you look at that movement. I also give him a silly little head tilt. And I make sure that the neck lines up properly for all of the keyframes. Then I work on making the mouth move. I chose not to give him different mouth shapes, like for different vowels and stuff, so it narrowed things down to just mouth open and mouth closed, which made it a lot easier for me. Then I went back and narrowed the gap between the opacity keyframes on the body. They were a little too far apart and I was worried it would look clunky. I think this is me attaching the body movement to the head movement with physics. To be so honest, it's been a little bit since I made this VTuber, so I don't quite remember everything I added. Yeah, wow, this is a lot of futzing with the physics. Okay, and then I go in and I add hair physics. I'm really glad I did. I actually think it adds a lot of movement and silliness. Unfortunately, in the sped up footage, the physics don't quite come across. And lastly, I add physics for the facial features. I wanted them to feel separate from the head, so they float and bounce on their own. And now, the META VTuber has arrived.